Good evening, everyone. My name is Michael Taylor. I'm the Artistic Director and Chief Curator here at VMFA, and it gives me immense pleasure to welcome you to tonight's very special lecture. Organized, of course, in conjunction with the museum's Frida Beyond the Myth exhibition. When we began thinking about programming for this much-anticipated exhibition, the unanimous first choice for an outside speaker was Hayden Herrera, given the monumental importance of her biography in the critical reception of Frida Kahlo since the 1980s. An author, biographer, and art historian, Hayden Herrera received her Bachelor's of Arts degree from Barnard College and her Master of Arts degree from Hunter College in New York. While pursuing her PhD at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, Herrera traveled to Mexico City in 1974, where her mother lived, and saw her first Frida Kahlo artworks. In May 1976, at the encouragement of Art Forum editor Max Kozloff, she published her first article on the artist, entitled Frida Kahlo, Her Life, Her Art. Frida then became the subject of her doctoral dissertation, which she completed in 1981. This dissertation formed the basis of her first book, entitled Frida, A Biography of Frida Kahlo, which was published to resounding success in 1983. Beautifully written and informed by impeccable scholarly research, Herrera's biography of Frida Kahlo was adapted into a critically acclaimed Hollywood movie in 2002, starring Salma Hayek as Frida. This was a breakthrough role for Hayek, who was nominated for Best Actress that year for the Academy Award, the first Mexican actress to be nominated for an Oscar in that category, as well as the BAFTA Award, Golden Globe Award, and Screen Actors Guild Award. We will be screening Frida tomorrow in the Cheek Theatre right here at 1 o'clock with an introduction by Sarah Powers. And I do hope you get the chance to see this incredible film on this big screen right here in this theater. Tickets are still available online and at our visitor services desk, so go get your tickets tonight. In addition to her pioneering scholarship on Frida Kahlo, Herrera has published on a wide variety of artists, including Mary Frank, Henri Matisse, Joan Schneider, and Isamu Noguchi. In 2004, her biography, Arshil Gorky, His Life and Work, was named as a finalist for the 2004 Pulitzer Prize for Biography. I first met Hayden through her work on Gorky while working at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and her meticulously researched biography provided an inspirational roadmap to follow for the Arshil Gorky retrospective that I curated in Philadelphia, London, and Los Angeles in 2009. Hayden was such a gracious friend and generous collaborator that it was a joy to connect with her again through VMFA's Frida exhibition. In tonight's lecture, entitled Frida, Her Life and Art, Hayden will explore the artist's life and work, examining how Frida's imagery was directly inspired by the events that happened to her, including her traumatic bus accident and her complex and often tumultuous relationship with her husband, Diego Rivera. As you know, she always said, I had two accidents in my life, the bus and the tram colliding, and then Diego, and Diego was by far the worst. One of the reasons we know these stories so well and can appreciate Frida's daring contributions to 20th century art is through Hayden Herrera's groundbreaking biography, which helped turn Frida into the international icon that we know and love today. She literally wrote the book on the artist's paintings and showed how Frida used her emotionally charged artworks to dispel loneliness, exercise pain, and strengthen her fragile hold on life. Hayden, we are so honored to have you here tonight. Please join me in welcoming Hayden Herrera to the stage.
Good evening. I'm really happy to see Michael again and very happy to see the beautiful Kahlo show that is in this museum. Some things that I hadn't even seen before. It was wonderful. Okay. This is Frida Kahlo's The Broken Column from 1944. Beginning in 1926, when she painted her first self-portrait, at the age of 18 and ending with her death in 1954 at age 47, the Mexican painter Frida Kahlo produced some of the most courageous and extraordinary paintings of the 20th century. And she did, I would say, mostly self-portraits, but there were also about 80 paintings of other subjects, portraits of friends and still lifes, marvelous still lifes. She painted herself so often in order to extend her being into the world and to make herself known. And she certainly did make herself known. I think, oops, okay, we go forward. Yeah. There we are, Frida as a Barbie doll. The last probably 45 years, Frida has become this international cult figure, starting really in the late 70s, thanks to feminism and multiculturalism. Numerous books, films, exhibitions focusing on Kahlo began to appear. And what is called Frida Mania also began to appear, and it prompted an industry of things like the Barbie doll. And there were incredible objets, and some of them are very nice in this shop. I just bought a Frida Kahlo mug there. So there were Frida Kahlo t-shirts, fans, jewelry, refrigerator magnets, calendars, computer, mouse pads, and of course the Barbie doll. I just want to show you, now we have a line of nail polish, Frida Kahlo nail polish. She's everywhere. And then I was really happy to find a macho man, I think he's the macho man, but with a Frida Kahlo tattoo on his right bicep. That was kind of extraordinary. Kahlo has captured the imaginations of scholars, artists, and movie stars. Madonna, who I had a chance to interview when I was writing about Frida, she said Frida Kahlo is, what was it exactly? Frida Kahlo was a drama queen, and I can identify with that. So Salma Hayek, who you'll see in the movie tomorrow, also starred in a Kahlo film, and I did get to know her a little bit. She actually identified so much with Frida that she took drawing lessons so she would see what it meant to make art. So as a cult figure, Kahlo has taken on a kind of magical power. Her self-portraits have become objects to be revered like icons. More important in a way, I think her work has become inspirational for many artists, especially women artists, but also for a whole generation of Mexican painters, mainly painters, who emerged in the 1980s and followed her example in making art that was emphatically personal. Now we're going to go back to the broken column. Kahlo painted herself cracked open, as in the broken column here from 1940. No, sorry, that's 44. Wearing Christ's crown of thorns. Oh, now I have to get there. Having bleeding on a hospital bed, having a miscarriage. Again, in a hospital trolley, having a back operation. And finally, here is sleeping with a skeleton. Death is omnipresent in her art. And always, even when she is accompanied, as in this 1949 self-portrait, she's put Diego in her forehead. She did it in another painting as well, a great painting. She tends to look incredibly alone. Loneliness is a great theme in her art. Her self-portraits are extraordinary for her honesty, with which she faced the changes in herself from suffering, and from age. And this, on the left, you'll see her at her height of beauty, 1937, and then 7 years later, 1945, self-portrait with monkey. Her face, as you can see, is much more vulnerable in the earlier painting, and looks on the 1945 one, as though she has suffered. In her direct and self-debunking manner, Frida Kahlo explained, "I paint my own reality. The only thing I know is that I paint because I need to, and I paint whatever passes through my head without any other consideration." I think Kahlo pierced so deeply into the personal that her images become universal. And as a result, when we look at her self-portraits, we feel that Frida Kahlo her eyes are boring into us, directly into us. I think that's part of her power, that everybody feels that she's talking to them. Kahlo's small, meticulously painted self-portraits demand our attention by singling out the viewer as the person who must share Kahlo's feelings and her pain. Yet, though the self-portraits are shockingly self-revealing, they do not offer a full confession. Gripped by the magnetism of these paintings, we come to realize that Frida Kahlo never lets down her mask of reserve. And I believe that this withholding accounts in part for the strange energy that emanates from her paintings. And it was this energy that prompted the surrealist poet and essayist André Breton to call Frida Kahlo's art a ribbon around a bomb. The energy comes also from Kahlo's intense need to confront and communicate and exercise. That was good, Michael. Exercise, get it out of her and put it on a painting. Her pain, and really was as if by painting the pain into an icon, she could free herself from it. "I paint self-portraits," Kahlo once said, "because I am so often alone, because I am the person I know best." She had time to know herself. In 1925, when she was 18, oh, that's her self-portrait. I guess I didn't bring it. Anyway, there is a little ex voto that she painted. It's not a great work of art, but it shows herself having the accident, and it's a painting. And she had this terrible accident, then coming home from school in a bus, and a trolley car rammed into the bus. It broke the bus apparently kind of in half. And she was injured, her back, her collarbone, her leg, lots of, they really didn't think, the Red Cross came, they didn't think it was worth trying to save her because she was surely going to die. But luckily, she had her friend Alejandro Gomez Arias, who's painting, you'll see right at the beginning of the show, with her, and he persuaded them to take her to the hospital. And she did survive. Although in the hospital, she said, "Death wanders around my room at night." A year later, she painted her first self-portrait, which is in the show. It's a very, very beautiful painting from 1926. She had just barely recovered from the accident. It shows that from the beginning, painting the image she saw in the mirror was both a self-exploration and a way of attaching people to her, of holding on to people. She painted it as a gift for Alejandro Gomez Arias, her boyfriend, at a very moment when he was pulling away from her. His parents, I think, disapproved of her because she was now crippled, and they sent him on all over Europe for a trip. But he was still in Mexico City when she painted this, and she sent it to him. And when she sent it, she wrote a note. "I implore you to hang it in a low place where you can see it as if you were looking at me." And so, feeling isolated by illness, Kahlo painted substitute Fridas. That's why there are so many self-portraits. that could withstand life's blows and confirm her fragile hold on life. This dialogue with herself produced some of the most original and courageous imagery of the 20th century. To alleviate her depression over a miscarriage in Detroit in 1932, Kahlo embarked on the project of painting every year of her life. And she began at the beginning with My Birth, which is a tiny painting, and it's very much like an exodo. It's a little painting on tin. It's probably about that size, and it shows Frida Kahlo is having a miscarriage, but it's also her birth, her mother giving birth to her. But it's a very strange birth scene in that everybody in it is dead. She said, the painting showed, quote, how I imagined I was born. And it's like a retablo, but the scroll here is not filled in. Usually they would say, thanks to the Virgin for saving me from this and this that happened on such and such a date. And then you'd have the intervention of a saint. Then that saint would be in the sky. In this case, you have the Virgin of Sorrows in a painting. She's pierced by knives, hanging above Frida Kahlo's bed. It's interesting that I think it was Rivera who suggested that she paint a little bit like ex voto paintings. And I think that the slight primitivism of ex voto paintings and the tiny scale really helped to sort of mitigate the terrifying subject matter. Oh, there's on the right is an ex voto with the holy figures in the air and somebody who's happy to have gotten saved from something, some illness there. She continued the story of her life with My Nurse and I from 1937. It's a very strange painting. It's one of her best paintings, and she thought it was one of her best paintings. It shows her in the arms of her Indian wet nurse, and even as she declares her pride in her native roots, Kahlo's feeling of separation, of being alone, is apparent in the nurse's unloving embrace. Again, it's like an ex voto. The scroll is not filled in because there was no salvation here. And she said she painted her head as an adult head because it was she that did the remembering. On the other hand, she didn't remember her nurse's face, so she therefore gave her a Teotihuacan mask because she couldn't remember her features. She said about this painting, I came out looking like such a little girl, and she, so strong and saturated with providence that it made me long to sleep. So from her point of view, this is a comforting painting, but I think it really isn't. The nurse, I think, embodies a kind of cruel fatalism, and it's almost as though she's offering Frida Kahlo as some kind of sacrificial creature. What Frida has done is taken the traditional Madonna Caritas image of the Virgin suckling Christ and changed it to express her own feelings of loss and disconnection. Those feelings started very early in her life. She said, quote, my mother couldn't suckle me because I was 11 months old after 11 months after I was born, my sister Christina was born. I was fed by a nana whose breasts they washed every time I was going to suckle. The next one in the story of her life, my grandparents, my parents, and I, it's from 1936. Here she's probably about 2 years old. She's now in the patio of the Blue House in Coyoacán, which is now the Frida Kahlo Museum. It's sort of a family tree from a child's perspective. Her parents taken from a wedding photograph right above her, and she's central, Frida Kahlo, naked in the garden, the patio in the middle of the Frida Kahlo house. And then her maternal grandparents on the left, and you can see that they were of mixed origin, and then her German grandparents on the right. It's actually a triple self-portrait. There's Frida, and then to Frida Kahlo's, well, to the left of Frida Kahlo, is on her mother's wedding dress is a fetus. That's Frida too. And then down below that, you see her conception with a sperm getting into an egg. She was very witty. She had a lot of fun, and it's actually, this is a very beautiful painting. I'd forgotten that there was the ocean behind there. Not near her home at all, anyway. Okay, so, I wanted to just show you, this is the Frida Kahlo Museum, and you can see how very much it is like what she painted back in 1936. This is her father. It's a portrait she did in 1959. It's called Don Guillermo Kahlo. And this on the right is a self-portrait. He did quite a lot of self-portraits by Kahlo, who was a very good photographer, mostly did colonial buildings, but he also did a lot of portraits, and that was important for Frida Kahlo because his portraits were, many of them people, many of them were self-portraits, so she was sort of used to the idea of portraiture. She also helped him in his work. She would accompany him on photography outings. She also, her first brush work was retouching photographs with a very small brush. Then at the age of about 7, she had polio and was confined in her room for quite a long time, many months, and her father really helped her to get better, to cure her. And it was, again, something that enhanced her feeling of isolation because she ended up with her right leg thinner than the left one, and she had to wear a lot of socks, one on top of the other, to hide that. Nevertheless, when she went out and saw her friends, they teased her and said, Frida Kahlo, pata de palo. It's Frida Kahlo, peg leg. She certainly had a sense of, early on, of being different. The illness was also a bond with her father, who was an epileptic. And Frida said of him, my childhood was marvelous because although my father was a sick man, he had vertigos every month and a half. He was an immense example to me of tenderness, of work. He was a photographer, also a painter, and above all, of understanding for all my problems. This goes on with the story of her life. I'd say that she's about 4 years old in both of these paintings, and both of them are from 1938. And she's in the one on the left, it's called Four Inhabitants of Mexico, and they're sort of artifacts like a Judas figure, a pre-Columbian sculpture, a skeleton. There are a lot of those in Mexico on the Day of the Dead, a clay skeleton, and then a little straw pony, I think it is, a straw horse. And these are the kinds of pre-Columbian and popular art objects that Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera collected or had in their house. It's both of these paintings, she's now not in her patio. She's in a very deep, empty space, which occurs in several paintings, and it sort of gives you this feeling of her incredible isolation. In most of Frida Kahlo's self-portraits, she is immobilized, cut off from her surroundings, and alone. She is disconnected from everyone except the object of her gaze, which is us, the viewer. And it's also Kahlo herself, since looking in the mirror and then looking at her self-portraits, she was her own chief spectator. In 1922, there's the image of her as a schoolgirl on the right and of Diego Rivera on the left. Frida Kahlo entered the National Preparatory School. It's the best school in Mexico City. And it was very much a center of ferment during the post-revolutionary years. The revolution had only ended 2 years ago when she entered the school. It is also here where the Mexican mural renaissance began. It's on the left is Rivera painting his very first mural in the school's theater, Teatro Bolivar, it's called. And Frida Kahlo was up to a lot of mischief. I think even in her paintings you can see funny little mischievous details. She was a tomboy, and yet she was totally attracted somehow to Rivera, maybe because he was so fat and ugly and famous. She did things like soap the steps that he had to go up to in order to paint, and hoping to see him fall. He never did. He had a sort of elephantine grace. And then she'd if he was with a pretty woman, and she'd scream from a balcony there, she'd say that his wife is coming, Luta is coming, and he would get very nervous. She told her girlfriends, she had mostly male friends, she was part of a sort of band of boys called the Cachuchas. She said, "My ambition in life is to have a child by Diego Rivera, and I'm going to tell him so someday," which of course horrified her female friends. For Kahlo, life was really a battle against slow disintegration. She had something like 30 operations in her life, and the first being the accident. But it was the accident that made her an artist. She was, as she put it, in the hospital and then back in bed, still recuperating. She was bored as hell in bed, and that's why she just needed something to do, and she also wanted to help support her family. So I'm going back here to the first, there, I don't know why it's here, but this is the retablo that she made of her accident. And is it? Yeah, it's the same. The Madonna of Sorrows is the holy figure that saves Frida somehow. Yeah. Okay. We're seeing the first self-portrait again on the left, and then a portrait of Christina, her sister, younger sister, from 2 years later, 1928 on the right and 26 on the left. Her first paintings, her mother made an easel so that she could paint in bed, are portraits of family and friends and of herself. And the difference between the 1928 and 28 and the 26, the first self-portrait, is really night and day. She had pretty much recuperated by the time she painted her sister. And in 1928, that same year, she took some of her first paintings to show to Diego Rivera to see if it was worth becoming an artist, because she needed to make a living. And Rivera admired the paintings, and he very much admired the girl, the young woman, and a courtship began. And I think people always, Frida Kahlo is an incredibly original artist, but she did at one stage in her life she was influenced by Diego Rivera. This is 1929 during their courtship. It's her second self-portrait and totally different from the first one. She's now a contemporary Mexican girl wearing a Mexican cotton blouse, and very different. The other one is sort of, she called it her Botticelli, actually, the first self-portrait. She shared with Diego an ethic of mexicanidad, revering everything that was popular art, that was pre-Columbian art, anything that was sort of regional. She started wearing Tehuana costumes, which the Tehuana women were the strong women. They ran the economy. And she wore these long skirts and costumes partly to camouflage her pain and to hide her limp. She had a slight limp, and also to show her allegiance to the Mexican people. And beyond that, Rivera greatly liked her Tehuana costumes, and so she did it to please him. Like many other Mexican painters of the post-revolutionary period, including Rivera, because you're seeing a Diego Rivera on the right, a 1926 Rivera, and on the left is an Indian girl painted by Frida Kahlo in the year that she was being courted by Rivera. There were a lot of Mexican artists started painting Indians, and primitivism, part of Mexicanidad was a kind of enjoyment of that culture, the Indian culture of Mexico. I've always found, I mean, these are both good paintings, but I find Frida Kahlo's painting much more poignant, even though Rivera's is maybe more accomplished. But it's got that little safety pin holding her dress together, and it shows you a lot about children and how they feel. Whereas Rivera's is just a cute Mexican child. Okay. They married in August of 1929. There's a photograph of them that she's smoking. It was typical of her to be smoking in a wedding photograph. And on the right is a painting that she did of a sort of marriage. It's a marriage portrait, but it's from 2 years later, 1931. Her mother, Frida Kahlo's mother, said the marriage was like the marriage of an elephant and a dove. Kahlo, everything painful in her life she chronicled. Anyway, so she chronicled her marriage, which was incredibly difficult marriage. I think the problems, even in this early double portrait, the problems are beginning to show themselves, like Rivera's turning away. She's extending her arms towards him. He is the great maestro holding the palette and brushes, and she is just this pretty exotic little wife, the worshipful wife. And I think the body language suggests Rivera's immense egotism and also his unpossessibility. He was a major philanderer, and Frida Kahlo put up with it. She often scoffed at the different women that he chose. Not always, though. She said about her marriage, quote, "Being the wife of Diego is the most marvelous thing in the world. I let him play matrimony with other women. Diego is not anybody's husband and never will be, but he is a great comrade." But in this painting on the right, for all her insistence that Rivera should be free, she's placed their clasped hands in the very center of her portrait, and I think the pivot of her life, besides painting, was the marriage bond. This on the left is a drawing. It's very different. And for the marriage portrait, I think it's quite a lot earlier, and she had a miscarriage very soon after getting married. Well, it was actually a therapeutic abortion. The baby was in the wrong position. But you can't see it, but she did draw the baby, the fetus, on her stomach and then erased it. She said, "We could not have a child, and I cried inconsolably, but I distracted myself by cooking, dusting the house, sometimes by painting, and every day going to accompany Diego on the scaffold." it gave him great pleasure when I arrived with the midday meal in a basket covered with flowers. So she had to be the constant seducer and charming wife. Okay, then they were in the United States in the first half of the 1930s. First it was New York, then it was San Francisco, then Detroit. And this painting is from when they were in Detroit in 1932. It's called Henry Ford Hospital. You saw it earlier. She is the pain and feeling of loss of having this rather dangerous miscarriage, and actually made her focus for the rest of her life on her most personal experience. It was at this point that Rivera suggested that she paint paintings like ex-votos. And she began to paint mostly self-portraits after this, and it was here in Detroit that she formed her distinctive style, based partly on retablos, or ex-votos, and partly on Mexican popular art. It has that vast empty space that gives you a feeling of intense loneliness, and then her bed is just sort of flying around, and those are all 6 symbols of her miscarriage, she said, and in a way, it's like a retablo with those symbols taking the place of the holy intercessor in the sky. That is the Ford Rouge plant in the distance, and Rivera was there doing studies for his Detroit Institute murals, so that suggests this incredible, even more loneliness, because her husband is over there having a very good time because he's obsessed with industry and machines and loved to paint them. And there she is, lying in bed, bleeding. And it's an amazing portrait in that it's all about her looking at herself, how she feels, nothing to do with the male gaze. Oh, I'm just showing you a little tiny piece of popular art that I picked up in Guadalajara, and it says, "Last battle," there. It's to show that there are this kind of thing in Mexican popular culture. So this is another Detroit painting. It's called Self-Portrait on the Borderline, and you see her on the right painting it. And you can see how small it is and how fine her brushes were. You can tell from the portrait that she's holding the Mexican flag that she's more partial to Mexico, which, even though it's full of death and it at least has plants growing at the bottom, even though it has a collapsing pyramid. But the United States, it is the American flag being besmirched with smoke and industry, and instead of plants, you have sort of machine images. Her childlessness came out in many, many of her paintings. It's one of her themes. This is Me and My Doll from 1937. It's again, she's smoking, as she was in her wedding portrait. She said, "Painting completed my life. I lost 3 children. Painting substituted for all of this. I believe work is the best thing." And she painted one of the things, a lot of her paintings have monkeys in them. This is one from 1939, self-portrait with monkey. And then there's another one from 1943, self-portrait with monkeys. But she had spider monkeys, she had parrots, she had escuincle dogs, those hairless Mexican dogs. But when she accompanies herself with monkeys or any other animal, it really doesn't alleviate the sense of solitary, being so alone. And in a way, I think the monkeys almost emphasize how lonely she is. Another painting having to do with childlessness, I think, is Roots, one of her best paintings from 1943. It's a childless woman's dream of her body opening up and turning into a vine, and that gives her own blood into the Mexican, very parched Mexican earth. And often when she does paintings of it in a Mexican landscape, there are these great barrancas or chasms opening in the land that are sort of often echo her own broken openings in her own body. Childlessness led to an obsession with the theme of fertility, and it reinforced Frida Kahlo's vision of the interconnectedness of all of life. So she's done these several still lifes that are about plants that are half human and very much sexual, a lot of sexual imagery. There's an embryo in there, it's crying, that embryo. And then this one is like the flower of life, but it's also a womb. There's a penis in there ejaculating, and there's a lot of sexual imagery. But then again, roots. You see in an awful lot of her work, you see these roots, and the roots often are sort of connected, her connection to life. So she did all these hybrids. Then in 1933, this painting is in the show, and it's a wonderful painting. They were in New York, where Diego Rivera was painting his Rockefeller Center mural. And Kahlo began this painting there. It's called My Dress Hangs There. And it was kind of her own political manifesto, because Rivera's Rockefeller Center mural became very political. She was horrified living in New York during the Depression. The rich were sipping cocktails while there were bread lines. And actually, there's a bread line. Let me see if I can find it. Does this? Oh, wait, I should do it over here. I think that's right there. That's the bread line. These are all collaged images here, and actually, she very much. This is Trinity Church and Federal Hall, and they're linked by a ribbon to show that the relationship between Protestantism and money, capitalism. Then this is a collaged thing that says weekly sales in millions. She was being disapproving of capitalism. She's also making fun of American values, great, sorry, what did that? Okay, wait. There it is again. Making fun of plumbing, excellent plumbing, and then a sports on another pedestal, and waste in a garbage can, and then Mae West being burned up over there on the left. Mae West was an actress that Rivera thought was the most sumptuous possible person, and I think Frida wanted to burn her up. Frida is out of her dress, and it's because she was really homesick for Mexico. And I've always thought that boat, let's see, there it is. That boat is actually collaged on there, and that she's sort of thinking, I want to get on a boat and go back to Mexico, which was not what Rivera wanted to do. Rivera, they did return to Mexico at the very end of 1933, and Rivera was furious with Frida for persuading him to go back to Mexico, and he had a love affair with her younger sister, Cristina, which this was not a love affair of Rivera's that Frida Kahlo could tolerate. So she separated from Rivera and cut off her hair, and she painted no paintings at all in 1934. And then in 1935, she painted only 2 paintings. This one called A Few Small Nips, and the other is a little self-portrait, not a very great self-portrait. Anyway, it's an incredible painting. It's probably, when she was most hurt by Rivera, her paintings get that much bloodier. Apparently she had read a newspaper article about a man who, taken before the judge for having murdered his girlfriend, said, "I only gave her a few small nips." And Kahlo would have partly found that funny. I think her humor is in this sort of love dove, you know, two doves holding up the scroll. I'm going to show you a Jose Guadalupe Posada. He was a turn of the century wonderful printmaker. This is an engraving, and he did quite a lot of engravings of men doing violence to women. So in a way, Kahlo's painting is sort of a painted broadside. She said that she needed to paint A Few Small Nips because she herself felt, quote, murdered by life. And in fact, she tried to murder this painting. It's not only got it has the blood all over the frame, but she stabbed the frame, and there are stab marks in the frame. I mean, she was upset and angry on this period of her life. But there's a photograph in the show of her and Christina that I suspect is from 1935, that they're looking very loving with each other, and apparently she very quickly forgave her sister and, of course, forgave Rivera. 2 years later, she painted this painting on the left. It's called Memory, and it's sort of a memory of how hurt she was when Rivera had that affair with her sister. Again, you got her out of her own Tijuana dress and her school clothes on the left, and a sword piercing through her heart would be, and little cupids on the end of it, sort of making it all the more painful, and her own heart extracted. And she actually had several foot operations at that point, so that's why her foot looks sort of bandaged. Kahlo always showed pain through bodily wounds and not through facial expression. This is a photograph by Manuel Alvarez Bravo that I just thought captured something of the poignancy of the empty dress. Anyway, it's a beautiful photograph of Frida on a roof. And this is just to show you that this bloodiness in her work is something that a Mexican is very familiar from Mexican churches that are full of sculptures. This is not a Mexican sculpture, it's Bolivian, but they're full of sort of painful, bloody, extremely bloody images and sculptures. So it was sort of part of the culture. In 1937, Diego Rivera arranged for Leon Trotsky and his wife to have asylum in Mexico, and they arrived. And at this point, Frida Kahlo and Diego were living in a house that they had built while they were in the United States in the San Angel section of Mexico. And she lent the Blue House to Trotsky. Actually, her father was still living there, so that must have been interesting, sort of connection. Anyway, this self-portrait for Trotsky she's again at the height of her beauty, and showing herself sort of between two curtains. It's a beautiful portrait. She dedicated it to Trotsky and gave it to him. And I'm just going to show you, compare it. They owned quite a lot of 19th century folk portraits, and this one on the right is the most similar. It's by, it is by Estrada, Jose Maria Estrada's 19th century The Lady in the Red Dress. In 1938, André Breton, the so-called Pope of Surrealism, came to Mexico and he claimed Frida Kahlo for Surrealism. And in that year, she painted this one painting that I think comes close to Surrealism. It's called What the Water Gave Me, and it is sort of a reverie about death and birth and New York. It's full of strange images. I wish it was in the show. There again is she's out of her dress. She is drowning there, and there's her dress floating around, and then two Fridas on a sponge or something like that, and then the volcano in Mexico, and where is it? The Empire State Building, yes, is in the middle of the volcano being broken up. Anyway, and just, it's very real. There are her feet in the bathtub, and these are the sort of things that she's imagining, and her legs are at the bottom. I don't think she's really a surrealist. I think her fantasy was based on Mexican popular art and pre-Columbian art and 19th century folk art. It's not about mystification and enigma. It's really based on her life, her work, and that could be said to be a sort of fantasy she had in a bath. She said, "I never knew I was a surrealist until André Breton came to Mexico and told me I was. I never painted dreams, I painted my own reality." But it's certainly true that surrealism kind of helped her to follow her own fantasy, but it also helped her in her career. Breton suggested to the surrealist-oriented New York gallery owner, Julian Levy, that he should give her a show, and he did in 1938. And she went to her show, actually had a love affair with Julian Levy, and there are two photographs in the show of her naked from the waist up, and they were very fond of each other for a brief moment. And Breton also recommended her have the New York show, but then also that show traveled to Paris afterward in 1939, and where Breton had organized a big exhibition called Mexique. It's about all kinds of Mexican art. Anyway, at the opening, she wrote to Nicholas Marais, the photographer who was her lover and great friend for many, many years, and many of whose photographs are in this exhibition. Nick Marais, she wrote to him, "There were a lot of people on the day of the opening. Great congratulations to the Chikua," that was a nickname. Among them, a big hug from Juan Miro, and great praises for my painting from Kandinsky. Congratulations from Picasso and Tanguy, and from Breton, and from other big kakas of surrealism. She was a pretty irreverent person. She did manage to sell one painting to the Louvre, and Rivera is very proud of that. It's actually done, it's a hinterglass, it's painted from behind the glass, a nice little self-portrait. But when she got back to the United States, to Mexico, things were not going at all well with Rivera, and he asked her for a divorce, even though he's proud of how well she'd done in New York and in Paris. They were divorced for about a year, and even though she was very ill during that period, she painted some of her most powerful self-portraits. In this one, self-portrait with thorns from 1940, she's sort of comparing her sufferings with those of Christ. And even though she was miserable, there's this stoic impassivity in her face. She wrote to Nick Marais again in English, saying, "2 weeks ago we began the divorce. I have no word to tell you how much I've been suffering, knowing how much I love Diego. You must understand that this troubles will never end in my life. Now I feel so rotten and lonely that it seems to me that nobody in the world has ever suffer. Her English was not great, the way I do, but of course it will be different in a few months." During the divorce, I think this is one of her great self-portraits, but there were several. It was as though her misery energized her work, her creative process. This is one of her most famous paintings. It's one of the 2 very large paintings that she made in her life. The other one is lost somewhere. It's called The Two Fridas. It's from just about the time that she was learning, that he'd asked her for divorce, 1939. It's said that the Frida Kahlo on the left is the one he no longer loved, and the one on the right, how does that work? Is the one he still loved, but he clearly didn't because he'd asked her for a divorce. And Frida's she's holding her own hand. In the Tijuana Frida on the right is holding a photograph of Rivera as a child, and a vein of blood goes up from that frame, red frame, through both Frida Kahlo's heart, showing it's all about pain in love. And then the Victorian-looking Frida is trying to cut off the blood that originates in Rivera, and it splotches onto her dress, and then at the bottom, some of the flowers that were embroidered there are actually turned into blood splotches. Kahlo wrote about this painting to a friend of hers who was an art critic. She said, this is on October 1939, "The fact that I painted myself twice, I think, is nothing but the representation of my loneliness. What I mean to say is I resorted to myself. I sought my own help. This is the reason why the 2 figures are holding hands. There is little more I am able to explain because all the truly lively motives for this painting are without doubt subconscious. I believe the clear object of this painting is the relation between my inner life and Diego." It probably is one of the loneliest paintings, and the sky just dramatizes the whole loneliness, and of course she's again in a kind of empty landscape. From 1940, another divorce painting, Self-Portrait with Cropped Hair. It's in the Museum of Modern Art in New York. It's like this, she's made it into the sort of an illustration of a song, and the words of the song are above. "You see, if I loved you, it was for your hair. Now that you are bald, I don't love you anymore." Yeah, this is a very angry painting. She again, as she did when he had the affair with Christina, this time when he divorced her, she cut off all her hair and stopped wearing the Tijuana dresses that he loved, and he loved her long hair. So it's kind of a furious painting and a great painting, I think. She was so ill and had to go in, she was in traction, and very painful looking photograph of her in traction. Rivera was worried about her, and he asked her to come to Mexico, arranged for that, and so that she could see doctors. He was busy in San Francisco at the Golden Gate International Fair painting this Treasure Island mural, which he's put his wife in it. Whenever he painted her, she was always as a sort of personification of something. It's never very personal. And he said, Frida Kahlo represents, quote, "the Mexican artist with a sophisticated European background who had turned to native plastic tradition for inspiration. She personifies the cultural union of the Americas for the South. Now, Pauline Goddard, he had a love affair with Pauline Goddard while still in Mexico. And I think they left Mexico together, went to San Francisco, and she is the woman in the white dress. Rivera and she are holding hands around the tree of love and life. A reporter asked him about this painting. He said about Paulette Goddard, while she's there, he said, she represents American girlhood shown in friendly contact with a Mexican man. And then goes on, asked why he painted himself holding hands with Paulette Goddard. He said, it meant closer Pan-Americanism. The man was incorrigible, but he was funny. They remarried in San Francisco, and this is her first post-remarriage self-portrait. It's called Self-Portrait with Braid. She's taken the hair that she cut off in Self-Portrait with cropped hair and put it in a sort of pretzel shape on top of her head to sort of reaffirm her femininity. It's really actually a rather painful looking self-portrait, that kind of yoke of pre-Columbian beads around her neck and then this plant. She looks as though she's going to be suffocated, I think. But anyway, the marriage had the same old problems. Nothing got better. This is from 1943, Self-Portrait as Tewana, where she has painted her husband over her eyebrows. She was sort of, it's as though she's sort of obsessed with him, and he is kind of trapped in just like this kind of spider web of her self-portrait. She had this need to possess Rivera, and yet she kept wanting him to be free. It was such a strange conflict, that. This next one is a year later on the left, which is in the show. It's called Frida and Diego, 1929 to 1944. Those were the years that they'd been married. And it was from 1944, and she gave it to him as an anniversary present. Again, I think it shows her desire to, it's a tiny thing. Well, you'll see this in the show. It's maybe a foot high. This is about marital unity. It's very difficult because the two faces don't line up. It's all about disjunction, and then the only way to hold them together appears to be this strangling tree that's kind of a choker around their necks. I'm comparing it with a Tlatilco pre-Columbian head, very small. It's about an inch and a half high. Just to show that she was very much interested in duality, and that's sort of, in the 1944 painting, it's male-female, and Diego Frida, but here I'm not sure what the duality is, because they both look male. Then another present for Rivera was this drawing. It's called Ruin. And she, I believe here, has merged her image with Rivera's. It's sort of a mixture of them, and it's broken, and it's held together by this strange tree scaffolding. On the sort of stellae on the right, it says Deceit Avenue, ruin, house for birds, nest for love, all for nothing, ruin. And then she gives the date. Again, interesting that it was a present for Rivera, because it's... Okay, so in 1949, Rivera asked her for a divorce, again, because he wanted to marry the beautiful movie star, Mexican movie star, Maria Felix, and he was painting Maria Felix, so there they are standing in front of his painting of Maria Felix, her portrait. This was one of the affairs that really bothered Kahlo, because she had an intimate relationship with Maria Felix, so it's sort of a double betrayal. The portrait this was done the year that this happened, when he asked her for a divorce. And again, Rivera is on her above her eyebrows. But it's the one painting in which she sort of loses that mask of control, almost. I mean, her hair is loose, it's swirling around, feels like it's going to choke her. And she almost looks as though she's been or about to weep. Later that year, she painted another kind of marriage portrait. It's called The Love Embrace of the Universe, the Earth, Mexico, Diego, me, and Senor Zolotl. That's the little dog lying on the Earth's, or is it the universe? The universe's arm. It's a very strange picture of marital harmony, because actually she's cracked open and there are tears and she's blood. But she has discovered that the resolution to the marriage is to treat Diego like a baby, she had to be the nurturing mother. That was how she could hold on to him. She said in her diary, "Women, among them I, would always want to hold him in their arms like a newborn baby. At every moment he is my child born, every moment diary from myself." Okay, and then the last, after this 1944 self-portrait, there's a lot of paintings having to do with her many, many surgeries. The broken column is the first of them. In the end of the late 40s, her health deteriorated very quickly, and she had started having to wear corsets. Some of them were plaster, and this is a steel one. She painted her response to surgery a number of times. In this case, the opened up crevices in the earth are sort of echo her own opened up body and her own wounds. And she has painted an ionic column that is broken instead of her own spine. She's driven nails into her flesh, so she's turning herself into a sort of Saint Sebastian, an image for herself and for others to worship. She's sort of playing the role of the heroic sufferer. Tears dot her cheeks, but she does not flinch. For all her implacable strength, Kahlo does not act. She is acted upon. She is the immobilized victim of things done to her body. Yet, although she is a victim, there is something incredibly fierce and strong in her gaze. In her self-portraits, Kahlo is never the passive model for the male, or even she's not a passive model even for her own, as an onlooker. Instead, she is the object of her own piercing and highly active regard. Thus, the paintings, for all their stasis, so she never moves, shake with life because they embody explosive feeling held in check by a steely will, incredible willpower. Another surgery painting is The Little Deer. It's a little bit easier to take, although again, her body is pierced. This one was done, she had to go to New York and have spinal fusion in 1946, and she did this at that time, just to show how close her art can be to her life. She actually had a little deer called Granizo. This is again, also from 1946, called Tree of Hope. It's Frida's duality, the heroic sufferer in the Tewana dress holding her corset, and the victim lying on a hospital trolley. Kahlo is holding a flag that says, "Tree of Hope, keep firm," and it's an incredible painting. It is like an ex voto, and that Frida Kahlo is like the holy figure who transacts her own salvation because of having this steely will, saying, "Tree of hope, keep firm." But again, the Mexican landscape opened up into what were called barrancas, and echoing her own wounds, and then this menacing opening into the earth right in front of her. It's a dangerous situation there. This is, there we almost, okay. Yes, most of the year of 1950, she was in the hospital, having 7 operations on her spine. And this is the painting on the left, a self-portrait that she gave to her surgeon. On the right is a photograph of Frida Kahlo with Dr. Faril. And in the painting, it's self-portrait with the portrait of Dr. Faril. She painted it, I guess, when she got back home after the hospital. And her heart is extracted, as in many paintings, to show that she painted from the heart, and also she's painting with her own blood. So again, it's like a retablo or ex voto, in that Dr. Faril is the holy image that saved Frida. She said about it, quote, "Dr. Faril saved me. He gave me back the joy of life." That was in her diary. But she also said in her diary that she didn't know if she would be able to walk again, and that she felt, quote, "a desperation that no words can describe." She tried to eradicate depression by clinging to her alegria, or joy, alegria, and also by painting. But her will to live was almost broken when her right leg was cut off, amputated at the knee in 1953. And these are 2 images from her diary. On the left, "Feet, what do I need them for if I have wings to fly?" And on the right, it says, "I am disintegration," and there's Kahlo falling apart. I'm looking here, but you're looking there, very strange. Anyway, one of her last paintings, at this point in her life, she'd been a Trotskyite, now she became a passionate Stalinist, very obsessed with communism, and this was partly, I think, in order to have a bond with Rivera, who had also returned to the Communist Party. This is one of her last paintings. "Marxism Will Give Health to the Sick," 1954. Politics is kind of a religion. It's like a retablo in which Marx, the bearded guy in the sky, has enabled Frida to cast aside her crutches. She's clearly reading the little red book, that communist book, and it's the reason she has completely lost that refined touch of her tiny little brushes. That is because she could only paint for short periods, and she was tied into her wheelchair, and her handling of the brush becomes quite crude. But in a way, it's still a sort of wonderfully gallant image, even though maybe not a great painting. The last drawing in her diary is the one on the right, the sort of black angel of death, I think. And she wrote, her last words in her diary are, "I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope never to come back." I believe, I mean, nobody knows for sure that she took an overdose. She became, I forgot to say, in her brushwork, one of the reasons it was sort of a mess was because she became a drug addict from morphine and things that she took for pain. And so she probably took an overdose, although some people say it was pneumonia. Anyway, another clue is that she had an anniversary gift to give to Diego, but she gave it to him weeks before the actual anniversary because she knew what she was going to do, I think. So she died in July 1954, and Rivera was, some people said, like a soul cut in two. But anyway, he could have treated her better. After she died, Rivera said, "Too late now, I realized that the most wonderful part of my life had been my love for Frida." And he gave her house, the Frida Kahlo, now the Frida Kahlo, museum, to the Mexican people, and it's now the Frida Kahlo Museum. There's a photograph of her by Florence Arquin sitting in the patio of her house. In the Frida Kahlo Museum is one of her last paintings, although she'd been working on it for a while. It's called Viva la Vida, and at the 8 days before she died, she wrote those words, Viva la Vida, on the front slice of watermelon. It seems to be an ode to joy, and at the same time, it suggests that she felt death was imminent. In her last terrible months, she wrote in her journal, "I have achieved a lot. I will be able to walk. I will be able to paint. I love Diego more than I love myself. My will is great. My will remains." And her will was extraordinary, and it does remain, because to this day, thanks to her example of strength in adversity, her will is there to fortify all of us. Thank you.